Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to see you all again for those that have joined one of our Sift webinars before. For those that are new, because we've got a big audience today, thank you for signing up and thank you for coming along. We've got a superb session in store for you today, how to adapt to shorter certificate life cycles and PKI changes. For those that don't know me, my name is Billy McDiarmid. I'm the VP of Customer Engineering here at Sift. But most importantly, I'm really delighted to be joined by one of our partner colleagues, Matthew McPherrin. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for contributing to this session. Do you want to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Great, thank you. So my name's Matthew. I work at Let's Encrypt as the technical lead for our SRE team. So we run our CA that issues all the certificates, along with other infrastructure like the CT logs where they're all logged. And I have a lot of experience working both on our side issuing certificates as well as previous places managing all of that from the consumer side. So I've felt the pain, and I've been working to help improve it. So really excited to talk today about how we can get everyone on board and managing their certificates in the best way possible.
Awesome. And I see you're involved in B-Sides Toronto. We do a lot of starting to get involved in a lot of B-Sides. I was lucky enough to be involved in B-Sides Prague. We've been involved in other ones. So anyone in the room, just as we're going along, if you're involved in a B-Sides, let us know what chapter you're involved in. It would be great to see how many B-Sides colleagues and friends are in the room today. Okay, so exciting agenda. We'll probably run for about 35 to 40 minutes and then Q&A. Please do put your questions into the chat. We've got my colleague Marissa who is picking up any questions, and she'll make sure that we know about them and that we will actually answer them. So this is interactive. We'll answer as much as we can through the session. The agenda today, the state of the ecosystem. The busiest year that I can remember for some time in the world of PKI. So we are going to cover what's changing and, importantly, why it's changing. It's not just change for change's sake. It's important and it's all about improving how the ecosystem actually works and how it operates. We'll then cover automation as the driver, and we will talk about in practice what ACME looks like. I think a lot of people, because of the changes in the sector, may be quite new to automation, may be quite new to ACME. So we will cover off what that looks like. We'll then cover off certificate discovery and inventory. How do you begin to solve some of the challenges that are coming up in the ecosystem this year? No PKI session in 2026 would be complete unless we spoke about post-quantum cryptography as well. So it's changing a lot. We'll give you an update on that. We'll make sure that you walk away with what you need to know. And then we will wrap up with some question and answer. For a change, I'm not going to be the one doing most of the talking today because we've got a true subject matter expert with us in Matthew. So Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you to kick us off to talk about the state of the ecosystem, what's changing and why.
Great, thank you. So the biggest change that's coming soon and is visible across the industry is certificate lifetime shortening. This is a change being driven by the browsers who manage the root programs to fundamentally reduce risk in how certificates are used as a secure method of authentication. There is this ratcheting down effect that's going to happen, as you can see with the timeline on screen, where by the end of 2029, the industry requirement will be for 47-day certificates. Let's Encrypt has always done 90-day certificates, so this is going to be about half as long, twice as many renewals. You can opt into 45-day certificates today if you want to start testing and to manage that timeline on whatever schedule you want. But in February of 2027, we are going to go to an intermediate point where we go to 64-day certs, sort of halfway between 90 and 45. And then in February of 2028, we're going to 45-day certificates at Let's Encrypt, slightly under the maximum allowed by the rules. There's two other related changes that are happening. One is what we call the authorization reuse. For most people, this isn't going to be a big deal, but this is how long after you prove control of a domain that you can request a certificate for it. Currently 30 days. That's going to be going down to 10 days and then eventually 7 hours. That just is a big reduction in risk of how long after potentially a security event happens that you can get a certificate for a domain name. There's one other big event that's happening in the industry, which is that we suspect quantum computers may come in the next couple of years, maybe decade, maybe more. But the industry wants to be ready for that potential threat, as it is really an existential threat to PKI and certificates. So Let's Encrypt is currently working on making post-quantum certificates available, hopefully in our staging environment sometime this year and in our production environment next year. That's still working with the browsers and other root programs to make sure that those will be acceptable. That technical design is still ongoing. And that's in anticipation of post-quantum deadlines via various compliance schemes happening in the sort of 2029, 2030 timelines, depending on exactly what you're interested in being compliant with.
And I think that
what?
Sorry, Matthew. I was just going to say the point on that with post-quantum as well is very much that, yeah, there's a deadline that's quite far out at the moment, but industry leaders like Let's Encrypt, aren't, they're actively working to ensure that there is something going to be offered just now. Even people like Google are, bringing forward their own timelines and working to achieve some kind of compliance well in advance of, what other parts of the industry and even the regulators and governments themselves are actually doing themselves.
Yeah, and because a lot of these technological changes involve a multi-step process where we need to specify how the algorithms work, and then we need to have software developers in browsers, operating systems, library authors add support for that, and then eventually roll those out in operating system changes. 2029 is really not very far along. I'm sure many people in this call are running operating systems perhaps that have a 5-year support lifetime. Maybe some people running more long-term releases that have a 10 years support lifetime, and those OSs running today, if they don't support it, are gonna be a problem if we have deadlines that are within 10 years. So I think this is something that may require early upgrades or other workarounds. So certainly something for technological leaders to be aware that you might have to make bigger changes than just updating some config file. That might involve OS upgrades or other software upgrades outside of your usual schedule if you need to be post-quantum secure by that 2029 or 2030 deadline. So what does this mean in practice? Well, today Let's Encrypt does 90-day certificates. You could get away with doing them sort of quarterly. But with the 47-day limit, that means you need to do at least 8. In practice, what we expect is people will renew certificates monthly. That's where this 47 number comes from. You might be sort of confused why that number is. And that's basically, if you think about a month as being 31 days long, plus sort of an extra half month of leeway, you get to that 47-day number. So in practice, we expect this to happen monthly. And as we're talking about today with automation, hopefully that's not something that you're actually doing every month, but is just a process running all the time.
And Matthew, what impact does it have in practice on workload? So you've spoken about the reason that 47 days has been put in place to allow leeway, but from your perspective, or from Let's Encrypt's perspective, what are you expecting to see in terms of a change in workflow and change in demand on teams based on the number of certificate renewals actually climbing?
Right. So Let's Encrypt has always been built around the premise that the best way to make TLS work reliably is to make it fully automatic. From the very beginning, Let's Encrypt has always supported an API-driven flow. We've never built anything like UIs for renewing certificates manually. We think that it's best to do it fully automatically. So if you are doing it according to the way that we think is best, then there should actually be no real input. However, it does reduce the timeline if you have to respond to something breaking for whatever reason. These are all computer programs, they're all automation. We all know they can fail or go wrong or have API credentials expire or who knows what. So I think in practice, hopefully everything will stay the same, things will keep working, but it does raise the stakes a little bit in terms of needing monitoring and management over your certificates so that your workloads are doing the right thing. There's some more minor details, I'd say, like maybe you're automating the issuance of certificates, but you're not automating the renewal or the restarts or the distribution. And as these timelines get shorter, it really is more important to get that end-to-end lifetime. And you might ask, sort of, why are we doing this? What is all this extra work for? Why is it worth my time as an IT leader or employee to have to deal with this, basically? And we think that this is a big improvement on security for the web PKI, as we can get these down. One big thing is that we've seen problems in the web PKI before, where certificates are misissued for whatever reason, which we can revoke those certificates, but revocation systems themselves aren't always functioning the best. There's various shortfalls, and shortening the certificate lifetime has two big improvements on that. One of which is that just by being a shorter lifetime, the length of time after an attack happens is reduced because the certificate will expire. But also, if the certificate is revoked, the length of time that you're relying on it to be revoked is shortened. But it also makes the revocation systems themselves more reliable. One thing that we've seen is things like certificate revocation lists can get quite big if some security event happens. So not only does that security event, whether it's your Azure account being taken over or a domain name being hijacked in your DNS server, the exposure window goes down, but the revocation mechanisms get more reliable as things like certificate revocation lists get smaller without having to carry those revocations around as long. So how are we actually going to go about doing this, or how does Let's Encrypt work? And the fundamental thing that we have to do is automate these changes, because you can get away with manually issuing a certificate every year. Maybe you just have one website, you go click around, you get a file emailed to you from your legacy CA. But with Let's Encrypt and the standard protocol that is being issued, that is being used to issue those certificates, it's all designed around automation without human intervention. So typically, and of course, this will depend on exactly what your infrastructure looks like. You might have something like a web server, and that web server can just fully automate getting certificates from Let's Encrypt. And one of the things we really wanted to do was also avoid any sort of lock-in. There's a standardized protocol called ACME, which is not just supported by Let's Encrypt, it's supported by many other certificate authorities too. I would say at this point, most of the major certificate authorities support ACME of some sort. And that means that your client that you're using to request certificates can get certs from both Let's Encrypt, but any other vendors that you might want to choose. And that's something that we think is really important. You know, Let's Encrypt is a free service. We're not trying to get anyone's business and lock it in. Our goal is to really encrypt the web as a whole. So it's important that we have a standard protocol that everyone can interoperate with. And that is going to empower you as a user to both get certs from Let's Encrypt, but to use that same software to get it from any other CA, whether that's maybe your cloud provider. Both Google and Amazon offer ACME certificate endpoints that you can get certificates from, whether it's another certificate authority that you might want to use for any other additional features. You know, Sectigo and DigiCert are examples of large CAs that also offer ACME endpoints. Or you just want to have redundancy. You know, of course, I work as hard as I can to make sure that Let's Encrypt is always up, but we might be down for a minute. You know, everything ultimately is computers, internet links, like problems can happen. So if you want to be really resilient, you can use multiple CAs, and that's empowered by using the standardized protocol. And of course, the final point here is, you know, rapid revocation or replacement. One problem that we've seen in the web PKI in general is if something goes wrong on the CA side, revoking and getting everyone to replace their certificates can be quite challenging, often involving emailing people, trying to get a hold of customers to replace their certificates. And that's something, again, where we're working on new features in ACME that I'll talk about in a second to make sure that we can fully automate this flow. I'm going to go to the next slide. Yeah. So there's a couple new things in ACME. If you've used Let's Encrypt for the last 10 years, maybe you've seen some of these features, but these ones are some of the newest ones. The first one is a new feature called ACME Profiles. This basically is a feature that's added so that on your client, you can configure sort of what type of certificate you get. Importantly, for the transitions we're talking about today, there's a new profile that allows you to opt into getting these 45-day certificates early. So you can choose and manage that timeline on your own schedule instead of when the dates that we choose. Of course, for big IT teams and wanting to manage changes, that's important. We've added a new feature to ACME called Renewal Info. This is a big part of what I was mentioning previously, where we want to make sure that if something goes wrong on the CA side and we have to revoke certificates, that we can give that information automatically to clients so that they know they need to revoke a certificate. And you know, is hopefully a big boost for reliability and ensuring that your certificates are available. We're also offering short-lived certificates. You know, you might say 45-day certificates are pretty short-lived already, but we are working on even shorter certificates so that revocation sort of becomes fully irrelevant. These certificates are valid only for 6 days, which is the same sort of timeline that revocation works on. And if you opt in to short-lived certificates, which we know probably not everyone is going to be able to, because it really does require you know, highly tuned automation that you're monitoring fully. But there's some meaningful security benefits, and you should consider evaluating it. The last one is one that I'm really excited about. This is still in the design phase at the IETF, the standards organization that is designing it. But this is a feature we call DNS Persisto 1. every validation method in ACME, which is how you prove control that you have a domain and are allowed to issue a certificate for it, has some sort of challenge response flow. And there was a previous method that used DNS to prove control, but it had some challenges that made it harder for people to adopt. So we're currently in designing phases of a new challenge method. There's still a couple issues to resolve there, but we hope to have it available this year once the design is finalized at IETF.
Great. So there's a lot of change. Thanks for that, Matthew. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of different moving parts. Customers that I talk to, like you've mentioned, now understand that if they haven't automated before, that they now need to. As you've said, the part of the automation is that, yeah, automation sometimes still does fail. And as the moving parts all increase, as the changes come through, there's still a little bit of uncertainty about with customers about when we've been talking about how everything's going to come together. And I think it's important for people at the same time as they're understanding and appreciating and learning about all these different changes and catching up, to take a step back and start the journey of understanding, if they've not already done so, about how it impacts them and what they can start to actually think about doing with this. Okay. And certainly in the number of years that I've been working with customers, one of the challenges that still hasn't gone away when we start talking to people in the first instance is the visibility issues. Is that most, if not most, organizations think that they've got some sight of the scale of their infrastructure, think they've got some sight of the number of assets, the number of certs, the number of endpoints that are contained within there. But the reality is that they probably only see their public-facing certs that are coming from a single or a small number of certificate authorities. Like you said, Matthew, if someone's got redundancy in play, then yes, they might understand that they are using Let's Encrypt, that they're using Sectigo, and they're using DigiCert, but perhaps they don't know what other teams are doing in the background. They'll know about certs that have been deliberately issued and deliberately employed, and that there is some policy in place for. That's often the case when we speak to security teams, and there's a lot, I can see a lot of familiar names on the call. A lot of security people are here today. They will know about what they've got some written policy for, and they'll maybe know about what's in their primary domain space before they even start to think about domains and services that have been registered and created outside the primary space. Because the reality is that once you actually think about this, and once you start to answer that question and start to see what the full picture looks like, you realize that you've got an entire world outside of what most teams are actually seeing. You have to consider private certificates, internal certificates. Have you thought about wildcard configurations? Where do those sit in the estate? What about the third-party certificates that your web and email services do actually depend on? You know, even down to the basics, like the vast majority of organizations will be using, you know, social advertising. So do they understand the relationship between the certificates that are issued and utilized by the social media platforms and their own infrastructure? There's then decommissioned host names. There's services that are no longer in use, but are still presenting deployed certificates, but certificates that are likely now forgotten about and invalid, and therefore not being treated to the automation that you've been talking about, Matthew. And then there's other scenarios like merger and acquisition activity, or when you're purchasing other third-party services, you're maybe buying finance systems, you're maybe buying HR systems, you're maybe buying talent acquisition systems as well. So there's a bigger picture outside of what most teams actually see. There's a significant gap between perception and reality. And the 47-day lifetime, this is, like you said with PQC as well, this 47-day deadline or period, sorry, for lifetimes isn't far away. It's coming up very, very soon as the significant life milestone when it comes to how certificates are actually changing. So to start looking at this, I think customers, and to start understanding the scale of the problem, figuring out what the gap is between what you think you know and what is actual reality is really, really key. And it's changed certainly what's required in 2026. Now, in the past, it was probably enough to have some limited capability where you were only tracking, a certain number of certificates, that you didn't have that bit of visibility. But it's kind of changing what you need and to get ahead of this. And 2026 now, absolutely, Matthew's 100% correct, of course, on this, is that automation is absolutely key. And I'm really pleased that the industry and those in it are now educated and are starting to learn about automation and how important that actually is. And when you're starting to think about automation and the tools that you actually need to not only issue and replace or remediate certificates, you have to think as well about what tooling do you need in place to monitor what's actually going on in your estate, and think about, okay, is the automation that I'm putting in place, is that sufficient to also deal with the monitoring? Is it sufficient to actually give a consolidated view of all the certificates that you're actually using in every certificate authority? Is it easy to actually get set up? Does it provide a continuous view of the certificate estate? Does it correlate with other signals within your estate? Your hostname inventory, what your registrars are telling you, what your cloud providers are actually telling you. Are you looking and discovering certificates from multiple points of view and not just from different network scans that are in place? So I think it's the change that I've mentioned, that visibility problem, as people are thinking about how to solve it. I think it's trying to understand what do you need, and actually what you need may not be just one solution and one approach. You have to look at this holistically. You have to design something that actually addresses all of these problems in one place, and it does need careful consideration before you put this all together. Don't rush in and just buy something that promises to be the panacea. I can think about, is the solution I'm looking at actually addressing every single problem? Because our worldview right now is that one solution, one application, or one platform isn't going to help you keep up with the rate of change in 2026. And that's before we even get to post-quantum cryptography, because Matthew, as you said earlier on today, post-quantum computing, it could be in a couple of years, it could be in 10 years, it could be tomorrow. Who knows, when the first post-quantum computer is going to be out there in the public. But what does the audience need to know about the impact of post-quantum computing on cryptography?
Yeah, I think there's 3 key points about what we need to know. First is, what is the timeline that we have to make changes on? what changes have to be made and sort of what changes are going to be made in the future. So I'll say whole cryptographic industry has been working on figuring out how to get a post-quantum cryptographic transition. The standardized algorithms at NIST and other standards bodies have been available now in the last couple of years. There are standards from the US government, from the EU, from others on timelines, which sort of lead to compliance requirements. One big driver of these, the CNSA 2.0, is for national security systems of the US government, but a lot of other people are going on similar timelines. So that's sort of what we're presenting here. Let's Encrypt is currently working on a new type of certificate called a Merkle tree certificate, which will be post-quantum secure, that we hope to have available sometime this year to begin testing and available in production next year. That's in coordination with the browsers like Google, Mozilla, Apple, Microsoft, etc. So those operating systems and other, pieces of network equipment and stuff are going to probably start to support those in the next year or two. And then we start to look a little bit further out. Google, for example, has said that their target deadline for migrating to post-quantum cryptography is in 2029. And then the CNSA 2 and the National Security System deadlines are in 2030, 2033. There was recently an executive order from the US government that moved up some of these timelines based on what people feel is the impending risk of quantum computers getting sooner. One issue with quantum computers is that actually, we don't know exactly when they're coming, and we have to be prepared ahead of time. These deadlines are moving in, and we have to have everything lined up ahead of time. So we can talk a little bit about why that's becoming sort of urgent now, which I think is on the next slide. One big issue is that we can't just, easily flip a software update and start using new algorithms. Algorithm migration takes a long time, but in the case of post-quantum signatures in particular, which is the cryptographic algorithm that we use in certificates, the signatures and public keys are quite large compared to what we had in traditional RSA or elliptic curve cryptography. And based on research and how effective these are on the internet, this could be a pretty big impact on bandwidth and making TLS connections effective reliably across the internet. So the solution that is being pursued right now is called Merkle tree certificates. Fundamentally, what you can think of this as doing is these signatures, which are too big to put on every TLS chain, is that we can batch a whole bunch of certificates and we can ship those out of band to the browser, say every hour. And that way, you just need one signature for sort of all of the certificates on the web, which is a really interesting approach. But that is going to require a bunch of new software on all the end devices, and the browsers are working on that. There's this other thing, I'm here to talk about certificates, but actually that's only one of the two places that we need to upgrade TLS. Certificates authenticate a connection, make sure you're connecting to the website, API, whatever service that you intend to. But there's also what's called a key exchange to set up that connection and secure it. And that's where we also need to change the cipher suites in use. And that's particularly relevant today because it's possible that someone is capturing data right now that if that data is still interesting in 10 years from now when quantum computers are relevant, then it could potentially be broken, because it's not just the certificates that are vulnerable to quantum computer attacks, but it's also the key exchange. So this is actually an area where we can start making changes today. And these attacks are called Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later, because you capture traffic today and you can decrypt it later. That's really relevant for, it says here, government and military, who knows what spooky secrets they have, but also places like healthcare or finance that might be dealing with private information that, your users' PII that you're holding, or their sensitive healthcare information, or their finances are definitely still going to be relevant in 10 years from now, because people's names and addresses and healthcare info doesn't change over 10 years. So we can talk about what you can do today to get started on that particular threat. So one is, get the more automation in place. All of these future steps assume that you're going to have automation in place. The web PKI is increasingly going to be intolerant of not having automation. It's just the baseline assumption that we're going with going forward. One interesting thing, because the certificate is going to be a migration, there's going to be a period of time, probably over years, where you are going to have multiple certificates. You're going to have your classical certificate with RSA or ECC, and you're going to have your new Merkle tree certificate for devices that are capable of using them to get quantum secure. So that's already doubling or potentially tripling if you need 3 certificates. The number of certificates you manage, and you need to make sure that your certificate inventory management can keep track of those correctly, because who knows what new problems could happen if your RSA certificate expires and you didn't reload it, but your post quantum certificate is. So maybe everyone with updated Chrome or Edge gets the new post quantum secure Merkle tree certificate, but the older people running on an outdated someone's got Windows XP for some reason still, they're using the old RSA certificate to connect your website, and they might have a broken certificate, and you haven't noticed because it works for you. And then finally, preparing for post-quantum. As I mentioned, these Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later attacks are potentially happening, especially if you're handling sensitive data like PII or healthcare information. You really need to make sure that you have these new key exchange algorithms. The real short version here is you need to make sure that you support TLS 1.3, and that you have this hybrid post-quantum key exchange, which is ML-Chem enabled on your servers today. This is backwards compatible. This is widely supported, and it's really effective. Unlike with certificates, you can just turn it on without much risk of breaking anyone. So you really should have this today, or be planning to do it very soon.
Thank you, Matthew. And every time someone mentions running still XP, and when we're having these conversations, I still get greatly concerned about elevators, because in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, when we were at an event, the elevators in the hotels we were in are still running XP, and who knows what's sitting behind there. Thanks so much, Matthew, for that. I think the overriding point on this as well is there's quite a lot here, and everyone's digesting this in terms of what changes that they should be making. For me, one bit of advice from my side is it has to feel actionable. You have to, when you're escalating this to your heads of your directors, or importantly, when the heads of and directors as well are taking it down to their team, it has to feel actionable. So breaking this down in the way that you have is incredibly helpful, because you can start to think about it in these chunks of works to do. There are things that you can do fairly easily already. You've mentioned that enabling TLS 1.3 with the hybrid post-quantum key exchange is relatively pain-free or risk-free, certainly anyway. So from that perspective, it's fairly can be fairly straightforward. And similarly with building inventory, if you do that in the right way, it can be fairly straightforward and easy to do. So there are things that can be pain-free. There are things where the risks are certainly mitigated or fully understood. So don't try and do everything at once. Break this all down and think about it from a cost in terms of resources and financials perspective. Think about it from a risks perspective, and make sure that it's manageable. There's been a really busy chat. Thank you to everyone who's been jumping in and answering some questions as we've been going. We've had, so Dick Pearson asked, with quantum certificate support, will the root cert need changing? Adrian Mueller, thank you for jumping in and answering that. Yes, the root will have to work with a PQC pair, and it will go much further with Matthew, as you've said, with MTCs, with Merkle tree certs as well. So great question. There was another question from Adrian himself. When will Let's Encrypt and Certbot fully support the customer-friendly DNS persist 0.1 method? And Phil P has posted some further information there about that. But is there any actual date in place?
Sure.
Are we any closer yet?
We've largely completed the software engineering side of things. During implementation and discussion with the community at the IETF, we found a couple issues that we want to resolve. There's been some ongoing discussion there, but until those are resolved at the IETF, we're going to wait for that so that we can make sure we don't have any breaking changes or anything. The next IETF meeting is, I believe, next week. So hopefully we can get some consensus and move forward there. I would expect to happen, certainly this year is our goal. We were hoping it would actually be out by now, but as I said, we're waiting at IETF and working with the community to make sure those issues are resolved before we launch. There are test implementations available now, but they will actually probably change before we go to fully available.
Super. I've got a really interesting point from Pavan. We haven't necessarily spoken too much about this today. We've kind of touched on private certs a little bit, but Pavan Reddy, good question, thanks. What do you suggest for IoT or constrained devices in PQ mode? So we've kind of largely spoken about public, but what impacts are we expecting to see when it comes to IoT devices?
Yeah, IoT is really interesting because the constraints that IoT devices have can actually vary quite significantly based on what you're using them for and what the exact nature of it is. Some devices are very low power because they're a battery-powered device somewhere in the wild. Some of them are very bandwidth constrained because they're using maybe a network protocol like Zigbee that has very low bandwidth. Some of them may be very powerful devices, but they're just sort of embedded in some system that has limited management or updatability, but otherwise has lots of compute available. This is going to be a real challenge for the ecosystem. And actually, I think this is something that's going to be interesting, which is we're probably going to see a greater diversity of algorithms start to be used. Right now, TLS as used by the web can be adopted directly into IoT systems, but some of the trade-offs that Merkle tree certificates make to work on a sort of a global scale may not work for IoT devices. So there's definitely going to be some challenges there, and I can't provide all the answers today because there's just too many constraints. But I'm sure some devices will be able to adopt Merkle tree certificates, just like Let's Encrypt. Some devices may use a more traditional PKI, just with the MLDSA signatures.
Yeah.
those are larger, but maybe they can work in your IoT environment. Maybe you'll have to make some careful decisions about bandwidth or airtime for radios or that kind of things. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge for those more embedded devices.
Super. And I'm going to take one final question from Kellen. Thank you so much. Do you expect the adoption of PQC certs to support current automations via ACME? Of course, that's dependent on Microsoft, etc., for adoption. Just more curious on the issuer side.
Yeah, so this is a different, definitely an active topic of discussion. Let's Encrypt and other ACME CAs are having these discussions. We do expect that you will be able to get Merkle tree certificates for your post-quantum certificates via ACME. When I was discussing sort of what's coming new in ACME, we have this profiles feature that we're both allowing people to opt into earlier certificate lifetime shortening, but we expect to also use that same profiles mechanism to allow people's ACME's client to opt in to get a post-quantum certificate as well. I think there's going to be some additional challenges on the client side. So I say yes, it'll be available via ACME, but you probably will need to, for example, have your client know how to obtain 2 different certificates, a classical and a post-quantum, configure your web server to use those. If you're many web servers now have built-in ACME clients, so that's probably not as relevant there because they can just sort of do the right thing. You just need a software update. But yes, it's a little bit of yes, a little bit of no. But ultimately, Let's Encrypt is going to be an ACME CA. We're going to keep supporting ACME. We're going to figure out how to use ACME for our needs.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Such great questions today. This will all be available on demand. The recording will be sent out to you automatically shortly afterwards. So if you please do share this with colleagues, and you can get in touch with us with any additional questions. Matthew, absolute pleasure to work with you on this. It's the first time we've worked together on something, so I'm hoping it's not going to be the last time. I've really appreciated you taking the time out to join us. We have got 2 recommendations here, sets of recommendations on the resources side. Let's Encrypt, of course, I've got superb content, superb documentation, and a brilliant getting started guide on ACME. So go to let'sencrypt.org/getting-started. The Redshift blog, we keep it up to date as much as we can. We've got a wonderful team of experts here as well who keep on top of all the different changes. We've got Bushan and our product team. We've of course got Ivan Ristic as well. So we've got tons of content that comes out from there. So do keep an eye on there. And additionally, Redshift offers some free tooling. We took over the third-party certificate or the certificate monitoring service that Let's Encrypt provided up until the past couple of years. So we've been providing that service completely free of charge. You can sign up for that at redshift.com/certificates lite to help you start to gain some visibility of your estate and receive alerts about upcoming expirations. Thank you once again, Matthew. A real pleasure. Thank you again to everyone who's been able to join us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, wherever you are, and we look forward to you joining us for the next session. Thanks so much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.